My name is Alina Rowe, and I'm 31 years old. 3 hours ago, my mother collapsed crying in the lobby of my husband's company while security guards stood nearby pretending not to stare. My father kept saying, "Please. Just let us explain." But nobody in that building was paying attention to them anymore. Not after what happened. Especially not after my husband walked past them in a dark navy suit, handed his assistant a file worth almost $500 million, and calmly said, "Reschedule my afternoon. I'm busy." He didn't even look at them. And honestly, that silence hurt them more than yelling ever could. Because 5 years earlier, those same people skipped our wedding to attend a yacht party hosted by my younger sister's wealthy fiancé. They called my husband a failure. Said I was embarrassing the family. Said marrying a struggling tech guy would ruin my future. Now they were hours away from losing their home. And the only person who could stop it was the man they once laughed at across their dining table. I sat there watching my mother shake, clutching her purse with both hands, and all I could think about was one thing. The empty seats they left behind on my wedding day. And come to think of it, that wasn't even the worst thing they ever did to me. Welcome back to her revenge stories. Before I continue, do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel only if stories like this resonate with you. And comment below what time it is where you're watching from. I always love reading them. I grew up as the first daughter in a family of 3 girls. My father, Leonard Rowe, worked as a senior banking officer at Harbor State Credit Union in Tacoma, Washington. He wore pressed shirts every morning, polished his shoes every Sunday night, and cared deeply about reputation. My mother, Celeste Rowe, owned a beauty supply store downtown called Celeste Beauty VE Wigs. It wasn't some tiny struggling shop either. Women drove across neighborhoods to buy products from her. She made good money. We weren't rich, but we lived comfortably. Nice neighborhood. Good schools. Summer cookouts. Matching Christmas pajamas every December. From the outside, we looked like one of those stable American families people envy quietly. But inside our house, love was never shared equally. My younger sisters, Brielle and Bianca, were twins. In school, teachers nicknamed them the Ivory Twins because they were beautiful, smart, and impossible to ignore. They walked through life like everything naturally belonged to them. And honestly, in our house, it did. My parents adored those girls openly. If Brielle forgot to clean her room, my mother laughed and called her scatterbrained. If Bianca talked back, my father called it confidence. But if I forgot a single plate in the sink, suddenly I was irresponsible, lazy, ungrateful. I can still remember one particular evening when I was 15. It was raining hard outside. My backpack was soaked because I had walked home from school while my father picked the twins up from volleyball practice. The moment I stepped inside the house, my mother didn't even ask how my day went. She shouted from the kitchen, "Alina, the laundry's still downstairs." Meanwhile, Brielle and Bianca were stretched across the couch eating takeout and laughing at some reality show. I stood there dripping rainwater onto the floor while my mother handed me grocery bags like I worked there. And somehow, that became my life. Every day after school, I cleaned the kitchen, folded clothes, vacuumed the living room, cooked dinner, and later drove with my mother to help close her beauty store before coming home to continue chores. The twins barely lifted a finger. Sometimes they would literally walk past me carrying baskets of unfolded laundry and say things like, "Can you do mine too?" And if I looked upset, my parents immediately defended them. "You're the oldest. Set the example. Your sisters are busy. Act mature, Alina." Busy doing what? Watching movies. Going to parties. Taking selfies. Come to think of it, I don't even remember my parents ever sitting down to ask me if I was okay. Not once. And the crazy part is, I kept trying harder anyway. I thought maybe if I became more helpful, more obedient, more useful, they would finally love me the way they loved my sisters. So I pushed myself constantly. Honor roll. Track team. Helping at my mother's store. Babysitting neighborhood kids for extra money. None of it changed anything. One night, I remember overhearing my mother on the phone with her cousin. She was bragging about the twins, talking about how beautiful and gifted they were. Then she laughed softly and said, "Alina's the dependable one. Thank God somebody in this house knows how to work." I was standing outside her bedroom holding folded towels when I heard that. And I don't know why. But that sentence broke something in me. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't their daughter emotionally. I was labor. Responsibility. Convenience. Sometimes late at night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, I honestly wondered if I had been adopted. Because nothing about the way they treated me ever felt like love. When I got accepted into college, I genuinely believed my life was finally about to change. I still remember the exact moment the email came in. It was almost midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen counter finishing inventory sheets for my mother's beauty store while everyone else slept upstairs. My old laptop froze twice before the page finally loaded. And then I saw it. Congratulations. I covered my mouth so I wouldn't scream. University of Washington. Accepted. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. Real hope. The kind that makes your chest shake a little because you're scared to believe it's real. I printed the letter the next morning before school and carried it folded inside my backpack all day. I must have checked it 20 times just to make sure it still said my name. That evening, after dinner, I finally gathered enough courage to show my parents. My sisters were in the living room laughing over some dating show while my father scrolled through emails on his tablet. I handed him the paper with both hands. He had just his glasses and skimmed through it quietly. No smile. No excitement. Nothing. Then my mother looked up from the couch and asked, "Who's going to help me at the store?" At first, I honestly thought she was joking. I laughed nervously and said, "I can still help during breaks." But she didn't laugh back. My father folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table like it was some unpaid electricity bill. Then he said, "Your sisters are the brilliant ones. We'd rather focus resources on them first." That sentence stayed in my head for years. Not because it shocked me, but because of how casually he said it. Like my dreams were some minor inconvenience. I remember looking toward the twins hoping maybe they'd say something. Defend me. Anything. Instead, Brielle shrugged and muttered, "College is expensive." And Bianca added, "You can always go later." Later. Such a simple word. People don't realize how dangerous later becomes when you're the child nobody prioritizes. Weeks turned into arguments. Arguments turned into silence. Then one night my parents sat me down at the dining table and told me their final decision. I would stay home for 2 years first. Help my mother at the shop. Save money. Then I could continue school. I cried in my room for hours that night. But eventually, I agreed. Because part of me still believed them. Meanwhile, right after high school, my sisters left for college immediately. My parents threw them a huge send-off dinner at this steakhouse downtown. Family pictures. Gifts. Matching luggage sets. My mother even cried while hugging them goodbye. The next morning, she handed me store keys and said, "Don't forget to restock the front shelves." That became my life for the next 2 years. Wake up. Open the shop. Help customers. Carry boxes. Cook dinner. Clean the house. Repeat. And somehow, even while working endlessly, I was still expected to send money to my sisters occasionally because college life was hard. I remember standing inside the stockroom one afternoon taping shipment boxes while Brielle called asking for extra money for a spring break trip to Miami. Miami. Meanwhile, I hadn't bought new shoes in almost a year. 2 years later, when my parents started making excuses again about why I should stay home longer, something inside me finally snapped awake. Quietly, secretly, I reapplied for college. Took entrance exams again. Submitted financial aid forms late at night after work. And when the acceptance letter arrived, I didn't ask for permission this time. I informed them after everything was finalized. My mother looked furious. My father barely reacted at all. The morning I left home, my mother handed me a thin envelope with barely enough cash to survive a few days. No hug. No emotional goodbye. Nothing. And as the bus pulled away from Tacoma, I stared out the window remembering how differently they treated my sisters when they left home. Shopping money. Monthly allowances. Tears. Love. Meanwhile, I was leaving like somebody they couldn't wait to get rid of. That bus ride to college was the loneliest moment of my life. College nearly broke me. And I don't just mean financially. I mean mentally. Emotionally. Physically. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones so deeply you stop recognizing yourself in mirrors. By my second semester, I already understood something painful. I was completely on my own. My parents barely supported me unless I came back home during breaks to work at my mother's beauty store like some employee trying to earn permission to exist. Every dollar felt conditional. Every request for help came with guilt attached to it. So by second year, exhausted and embarrassed from constantly struggling, I got a part-time job at a 24-hour diner just off campus called Maple Street Grill. The place smelled like burnt coffee, fryer oil, and old pancakes. Most nights I worked closing shifts. Sometimes until 2 a.m. Then I'd drag myself back to my apartment, remove shoes that smelled like grease, sleep for maybe 3 hours, and rush straight to morning lectures pretending I was functioning normally. I became an expert at surviving on caffeine and silence. There were days I sat in class so tired my vision blurred. I remember one winter morning walking across campus in heavy rain after a double shift, carrying textbooks in one hand and leftover fries in the other because that was the only food I had for the day. Meanwhile, my sisters were posting beach pictures from Cabo. Designer bags. Boat parties. Expensive brunches. And the worst part. My parents paid for most of it. That was what hurt the most. Not poverty. Not struggle. The fact that my parents could help me. They simply chose not to. One night during finals week, I completely broke down inside the diner freezer. I had just finished calculating my remaining balance for an academic hold on my account. $1,000. That was all I needed to clear it and sit for finals peacefully. 1,000. I remember staring at the number over and over thinking. Surely this time they'll help me. So I called home. My mother answered on the third ring sounding distracted. I explained everything carefully. The deadline. The exam hold. How hard I'd been working. There was silence for a second. Then she sighed and said, "Come work at the store for a week first." That was it. No concern. No encouragement. No, "Are you okay?" Just labor in exchange for help. I didn't even argue anymore. I was too tired. So during finals week, while other students stayed on campus studying, I returned home to Tacoma and spent 7 straight days unloading supply boxes, assisting customers, sweeping floors, organizing inventory, and running errands for my mother's store. My back hurt constantly. My feet were swollen. And the entire time, my sisters called casually asking for money like I was some family assistant. Then came the moment I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was late evening. The shop was almost closed. My mother was counting register cash while I restocked hair products on the shelves. Without even looking up, she said, "Transfer $5,000 to Soraya tonight." I froze. At first I thought I heard her wrong. I slowly turned around and asked, "5,000? She nodded casually. She said she needs it urgently. I remember staring at her hands counting bills while my chest physically hurt. Because the amount I was humiliating myself and suffering for was smaller than what they casually sent my sisters without explanation. And what made it worse was this. My mother didn't even notice how painful that moment was for me. To her, it was normal. Soraya needed money. Send it immediately. Alina needed help. Come work first. That night after closing, I carried inventory boxes into the tiny storage room behind the shop and finally broke down. I cried silently sitting on the cold concrete floor between cartons of hair relaxers and shampoo containers while muffled traffic echoed outside. Not loud crying. Not dramatic crying. Just quiet tears from a person finally realizing something they spent years trying not to admit. I was never treated like their daughter. Not really. And sitting there alone in that dark storage room, surrounded by products I'd spent years helping sell. Something inside me emotionally detached forever. By third year, life became even harder. I had reached that stage where survival became routine. Wake up exhausted. Go to class. Run to work. Come home. Study half asleep. Repeat. Some weeks I barely remembered what day it was. And honestly, I think loneliness was starting to affect me more than the financial struggle itself. There's something painful about realizing nobody is checking if you made it home safely. Nobody is wondering if you ate. Nobody notices when you disappear emotionally. Then one night, everything changed because of one stupid accident. I had just finished a late shift at Maple Street Grill during midterms week. It was freezing outside, close to midnight, and raining hard. My backpack strap snapped while I was crossing the parking lot, and my books spilled straight into a puddle. I remember standing there staring at soaked papers thinking, I genuinely cannot do this anymore. And then somebody crouched beside me and started helping pick everything up. That was the first time I met Kalen Rhodes. He wore a dark gray hoodie, old sneakers, and glasses slightly fogged from the rain. His laptop bag looked worn out, and his car, if you could even call it that, was this ancient silver Honda that rattled when it moved. Not exactly the kind of dramatic movie moment people imagine. But I still remember the first thing he said to me. Your note survived. That's the important part. And somehow, I laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in weeks. That night, he drove me back to campus because the buses had already stopped running. During the drive, I learned he was a freelance programmer trying to build an AI cybersecurity startup called Sentinel Core. At the time, it sounded more like a dream than a real business. He worked out of coffee shops. Took random coding contracts online. Skipped meals sometimes just to keep paying server costs. But there was something about him that felt different. Kalen listened when I spoke. Like genuinely listened. Not waiting for his turn to talk. Not dismissing me. Not correcting me. Just listening. And slowly, he became the safest part of my life. He started waiting for me after late shifts. Walked me home carrying my backpack because he knew my shoulders hurt. Stayed awake helping me study for exams even when he had deadlines himself. Sometimes he'd show up with food pretending he accidentally ordered too much, and I knew he was lying because he barely had enough money for himself. One night, I caught him pretending he wasn't hungry so I could eat the last sandwich. That almost made me cry. Because nobody had ever cared about me like that before. Meanwhile, back home, my younger sister Brielle got engaged to a wealthy businessman named Dorian Valles. And honestly, Dorian looked exactly like money. Black Bentley. Tailored suits. Diamond watch. Perfect teeth. The kind of man my parents would worship immediately. And they did. My mother suddenly started hosting expensive dinners again. My father kept bragging about future connections. Nobody cared what Dorian actually did for a living. His money answered every question before it was asked. Then eventually, I introduced Kaylin. I was nervous the entire drive home. We arrived in an Uber because Kaylin's Honda had broken down again. The second we walked through the front door, I felt the shift in the room immediately. My mother's smile faded. My father looked Kaylin up and down carefully. Then came the questions. What car do you drive? What exactly do you do? How stable is your income? Kaylin answered politely, explaining his startup and freelance work calmly. Silence followed. Then my father leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. So basically, you're unemployed with a laptop. The room went completely still. I looked at Kaylin instantly. For just a second, I saw the embarrassment in his face. Not anger. Not pride. Just humiliation. But he still stayed respectful. Still thanked them for dinner before leaving. And honestly, that hurt me more. The second he walked out the door, my parents exploded. Love doesn't pay bills. Look at your sister. We wanted connected families. That man has no future. You're embarrassing us. I tried defending him. Tried explaining how hardworking and kind he was. But they didn't care. And sitting there listening to them praise wealth while insulting the only person who had ever truly loved me. I finally realized something painful. My parents didn't care whether I was happy. They cared about status. Soon, Brielle's wedding became the biggest event in our family. And when I say big, I mean the kind of wedding people post online for weeks pretending it's a celebrity event. My mother transformed overnight into somebody I barely recognized. Every phone call became about floral arrangements, guest lists, designer fittings, luxury catering, imported champagne, or Dorian's wealthy relatives flying in from Miami and New York. The entire family revolved around that wedding. Meanwhile, I existed somewhere outside the excitement like an afterthought nobody wanted to acknowledge. I wasn't included in dress shopping. Wasn't invited to planning dinners. Nobody asked for my opinion about anything. Honestly, if I hadn't seen random posts online, I probably wouldn't have known half the events were happening. One afternoon during my shift at the diner, I opened WhatsApp and froze. It was a digital wedding flyer posted on Bianca's status. Gold lettering. Luxury venue. Professional engagement photos. And at the bottom, the families of Leonard v. Celeste Rowe proudly invite you. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because nobody had actually invited me. Not directly. Not personally. Nothing. I remember sitting in the diner bathroom during break staring at my phone wondering whether I should even attend. Part of me said, don't go where you're clearly unwanted. But another part of me, the younger version of myself that still hoped for love from my family, kept whispering. Maybe this is your chance to fix things. So I went. Kaylin offered not to attend because he knew how uncomfortable my parents made things, but I convinced him to come anyway. I even bought a new dress for the wedding despite barely affording rent that month. Nothing extravagant. Just a simple navy blue dress I found discounted at a department store. Meanwhile, social media was flooded with videos from the wedding week. Designer gown fittings. Private wine tastings. Dorian arriving at the venue in a Rolls-Royce. My sisters laughing together in matching silk robes. Looking at those videos felt strange because technically, I was part of that family. But watching them online, I honestly looked more like a distant acquaintance. The wedding itself was held at this enormous luxury ballroom overlooking the Tacoma waterfront. Crystal chandeliers. White roses everywhere. Live violinists during cocktail hour. I remember standing outside the venue for a moment before entering because suddenly I felt nervous. Not because of the crowd, but because deep down, I already knew I didn't belong there. The second Kaylin and I walked inside, I noticed people staring. Not openly rude. Just curious. The kind of subtle looks people give when they're trying to figure out why someone doesn't fit the atmosphere. My mother saw me first. And instead of looking happy, she looked stressed. Like my presence complicated something. Still, I smiled awkwardly and congratulated Brielle. She barely hugged me. Then immediately turned back toward her bridesmaids. Kaylin squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "You okay?" I lied and nodded. But the worst moment came during the reception. We walked toward the family section near the dance floor only to realize there were no seats for us. At first I assumed it was a mistake. People were still settling down, servers were moving around, music was playing loudly. So I quietly approached my mother near the bar and asked, "Hey, where are we sitting?" She glanced toward the family tables. Then back at me. And I swear to you, I will never forget what she said next. "Those seats are for immediate family only." For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard her. I just stared at her. Confused. Humiliated. Heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the music. Around us, conversations slowly quieted because people nearby realized something uncomfortable was happening. Even Kaylin looked stunned. And my mother. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. Like I was embarrassing her simply by asking. I remember noticing strangers watching me while waiters passed carrying champagne glasses and wedding guests whispered quietly behind us. And suddenly every memory from my childhood hit me all at once. The chores. The neglect. The favoritism. The college rejection. Everything. It all crashed together in that single moment. Because standing there in that ballroom, surrounded by people celebrating family, I finally accepted something painful. I had never truly belonged in mine. After graduation, life didn't magically become easier. Actually, it became harder. Reality hit fast. Student loans. Rent. Groceries. Medical bills. Overdue notices taped quietly onto apartment doors. Kaylin was still fighting to keep his tech startup alive, taking freelance coding contracts late into the night while pitching his cybersecurity system to companies that barely responded to his emails. Meanwhile, I worked wherever I could. Reception shifts. Online customer support. Weekend catering jobs. There were months we survived mostly on noodles, frozen meals, and hope. But somehow, I was still happier than I had ever been growing up. Because for the first time in my life, somebody chose me consistently. Kaylin never made me feel like a burden. Not once. One rainy night, our apartment heater stopped working in the middle of winter. We sat wrapped in blankets eating cheap takeout noodles while he apologized over and over because he couldn't afford repairs yet. And I remember laughing and telling him, "This is still the safest place I've ever lived." He looked at me quietly after I said that. Like he finally understood how damaged my childhood really was. A few months later, Kaylin proposed. Nothing dramatic. No photographers. No expensive restaurant. We were sitting on the floor of our apartment assembling a second-hand bookshelf we bought online when he suddenly pulled a tiny velvet box from his hoodie pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. And honestly, that made it more beautiful. Because it was real. We decided to get married 6 months later even though financially it made absolutely no sense. The wedding was painfully simple. Borrowed folding chairs from a community church. Artificial flower decorations ordered online. A tiny rented church hall beside a parking lot. Homemade catering prepared mostly by older women from Kaylin's church. At one point, the cake nearly collapsed because the table underneath it was uneven. And somehow, despite all of that, I was genuinely happy. For once, my life felt honest. No pretending. No competition. No performance. Just love. Still, there was one thing I secretly kept hoping for. My parents. As embarrassing as it sounds now, some part of me still believed they would eventually show up for me. So Kaylin and I spent extra money we absolutely did not have decorating a special table for them near the front of the reception hall. White roses. Customized name cards. Gold table runners. I remember adjusting the chairs myself 30 minutes before the ceremony started. Making sure everything looked perfect. Like maybe if the table looked beautiful enough, they would finally choose me. Before the ceremony, I kept checking my phone constantly. No messages. No calls. Nothing. Then guests started arriving. Church friends. Coworkers. A few college classmates. Every time the doors opened, my heart jumped thinking maybe my parents had finally come. But they never did. The ceremony still happened. I smiled through photos. Said my vows. Held Kaylin's hands while trying not to think about the 4 empty chairs near the front row. And honestly, I almost succeeded. Until the reception. About 2 hours into dinner, one of my mother's church friends approached me carefully with her phone in hand. Her expression already told me something was wrong. She lowered her voice and said, "Alina, I think you should see this." It was a Facebook post. A video. My parents. My sisters. Dorian. Laughing on a luxury yacht covered in string lights somewhere along the Seattle marina. Champagne glasses. Live music. Designer outfits. The caption read, "Celebrating greatness with successful people only." I stared at the screen so long everything around me started sounding distant. The music. The conversations. The laughter. All muffled. Because in that exact moment, I realized something devastating. My parents didn't accidentally miss my wedding. They chose not to come. They looked at my special day. And decided a rich man's birthday party mattered more. I remember handing the phone back with a smile so fake my cheeks hurt. Then I walked back to my seat pretending nothing happened while something inside me completely shattered. Kaylin noticed immediately. He didn't ask questions. Didn't pressure me. He simply reached beneath the table, held my trembling hand gently, and leaned closer. Then he whispered softly, "One day, they'll regret missing this." And for some reason, the way he said it gave me chills. Marriage was hard. Not the kind of hard people post online for sympathy. I mean real hard. The kind where you silently calculate grocery prices before walking into stores. The kind where one unexpected bill can ruin your entire month. Kaylin and I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above an old laundromat during our first years of marriage. The walls were thin enough to hear arguments from neighboring apartments, and every winter the pipes made loud knocking sounds that kept us awake at night. Some months we barely survived financially. There were nights Kalen stayed awake until 3 in the morning coding while I sat beside him filling customer support tickets for a healthcare company just to earn extra money remotely. Sometimes we passed each other in the apartment like exhausted co-workers instead of newlyweds. But even during our worst moments, I still felt loved. And honestly, that changed me more than money ever could. Kalen never raised his voice at me. Never made me feel small. Never treated me like my existence was inconvenient. If I came home tired, he noticed. If I looked overwhelmed, he noticed. One night I fell asleep at the kitchen table while reviewing invoices for work. I woke up hours later in bed with a blanket over me and my laptop charging beside the nightstand. Tiny things like that healed parts of me nobody could see. Then life got even harder. I got pregnant unexpectedly. And for a while, we were terrified. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor crying because we barely had enough for ourselves, let alone a baby. But Kalen just held my face gently and said, "Well, figure it out together." And somehow, we did. Not perfectly, but together. Meanwhile, Sentinel Mesh, Kalen's cybersecurity system, kept failing to attract investors. For years, companies ignored him. Some meetings lasted less than 10 minutes before executives dismissed him politely. Others never replied at all. Still, he kept going. I used to wake up at night and find him sitting alone in the living room staring at code on his laptop with this exhausted look in his eyes. Like a man fighting desperately not to give up on himself. Then one morning, everything changed. I still remember the exact sound Kalen made when he opened the email. Not a scream. More like disbelief. One of the biggest tech infrastructure companies in California wanted a live demonstration of Sentinel Mesh after a cybersecurity breach hit several corporations nationwide. For the next 2 weeks, our apartment turned into controlled chaos. Kalen barely slept. He practiced presentations constantly. Rewrote slides. Fixed bugs. Ran simulations. The night before the meeting, we sat on the apartment floor praying quietly while our son slept beside us in a second-hand crib. And honestly, I was more nervous than he was. The presentation happened on a Thursday morning. Kalen flew to San Francisco wearing the only expensive suit he owned, one we bought together during clearance season almost 2 years earlier. I barely focused at work that day. Then around 7 p.m., my phone rang. Kalen sounded breathless. "Alina. I think this actually worked." Everything exploded after that. Within days, another corporation that attended the demonstration offered over $100 million to acquire Sentinel Mesh licensing rights. Then a second company countered with a $300 million partnership proposal. The news spread through the tech industry like wildfire. And then came the biggest shock of all. A global defense technology corporation offered over $500 million for majority acquisition rights and international deployment access. I remember sitting frozen on our apartment couch while Kalen read the email twice because neither of us fully believed it. $500 million. For years people treated him like a joke. Now billion-dollar corporations were fighting over his work. Suddenly his face was everywhere. Business magazines. Podcasts. Morning television. Tech conferences. People who once ignored his emails suddenly called him visionary. Then came Sunday morning. Back in Tacoma, my father was drinking coffee at the kitchen counter when he opened the Seattle Financial Journal. And there on the front page was a massive photograph of Kalen shaking hands with executives beneath the headline. Startup founder Kalen Rhodes secures historic $500 million cybersecurity acquisition deal. My mother reportedly grabbed the newspaper so fast she spilled coffee across the tablecloth. That same evening, after years of silence, my phone rang. And for the first time in a very long time, I saw my mother's name lighting up my screen. After Kaylin's deal became national news, my phone suddenly became very busy. It started with texts from distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Then old classmates. Then church members from Tacoma. Everybody suddenly remembered I existed. And then my sister started calling too. At first, Brielle acted casual. Like nothing bad had ever happened between us. She called one evening while I was folding laundry and immediately started talking about family reconnecting. "We've all been through a lot lately," she said softly. "Life's too short to stay distant." I remember holding the phone against my shoulder while staring out the apartment window thinking, "Now you remember I'm your sister." Because during all those years I struggled alone, nobody called to check if I was surviving. Not when I worked double shifts. Not when I got married. Not when I had a baby. But suddenly, after headlines and interviews and money, now family mattered. Bianca started texting me constantly too. Little fake friendly messages. "Miss you. We should do lunch. Mom talks about you all the time." And honestly, every single message irritated me more than I expected. Because every conversation pulled old memories back to the surface. The empty wedding seats. My mother telling me family tables were for immediate family only. The humiliation in Kaylin's face when my father mocked him at dinner. The years of neglect I kept trying to excuse because they were my parents. It all came rushing back. Meanwhile, life was quietly collapsing back into coma. And ironically, it started with the same wealth my parents worshipped for years. Dorian's businesses got hit with fraud investigations and financial problems. Within months, the flashy lifestyle disappeared almost overnight. The Bentley vanished. The expensive vacations stopped. And then came the divorce. Apparently Dorian left Brielle after financial pressure exposed cracks in their marriage. Rumors spread fast around Tacoma because people love gossip when rich families start falling apart. Bianca moved back home temporarily after losing her apartment. My mother's beauty store started struggling badly too. Online businesses and rising costs slowly destroyed customer traffic. Half the shelves stayed full because products weren't moving anymore. Then my father retired earlier than expected after health issues and bad investments drained most of his savings. Still, nobody told me any of this directly. I heard bits and pieces through relatives. Through social media. Through people who suddenly wanted access to us. Then one rainy afternoon, everything finally collided. Kaylin had just left for a meeting downtown while I stayed home with our son. I was making grilled cheese sandwiches in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I almost ignored it. But something felt strange. When I checked the security camera beside the front door, my stomach dropped instantly. My parents. Standing there soaked from the rain. My mother looked thinner than I remembered. My father looked older. For a second, I honestly froze. Because after everything they did, I still wasn't emotionally prepared to see them standing outside my house. My first instinct was not to open the door. And honestly, part of me wanted them to stand there feeling rejected for once. Then Kaylin called unexpectedly through the house intercom from his car downstairs. He had forgotten his laptop charger and saw them arriving from the parking area. I told him quietly, "I don't want to deal with this." There was silence for a second. Then he said softly, "Let them in." I opened the door slowly. The tension was immediate. My mother burst into tears almost instantly. Not graceful crying either. Real shaking, messy crying. My father looked uncomfortable standing there holding a damp folder against his chest while apologizing repeatedly. They kept calling me family. Calling Kaylin, son. And honestly, hearing those words irritated me more than yelling would have. Because where was all this love when we were struggling? Where was family when they skipped our wedding? Eventually, after nearly an hour of crying, apologies, awkward silence, and fake small talk, the truth finally came out. The bank was taking their house. My father had borrowed heavily trying to keep my mother's business alive after the financial collapse. The mortgage had been refinanced multiple times. Interest piled up. Debt swallowed everything. Now foreclosure was only weeks away. And sitting there in our living room, watching the same people who once mocked my husband beg for help from him, I realized something painful. They still hadn't come because they loved me. They came because Kaylin was their last hope. My parents sat across from us crying while Kaylin remained completely calm the entire time. Not cold. Not cruel. Just calm. And honestly, that somehow made everything heavier. The rain outside kept tapping softly against the windows while silence filled the room in between my mother's crying and my father's shaky explanations about overdue payments, loan extensions, and foreclosure notices. At one point, my father pulled documents from the damp folder he carried into the house. Bank letters. Final warnings. Debt balances. I stared at those papers thinking about how ironic life could be sometimes. The same man who once laughed at Kaylin for playing with laptops was now begging that same man to save the roof over his head. And Kaylin? He never once tried to embarrass them. That's the part that affected me most. Because if I'm being honest, after everything they did to us, part of me expected anger from him. But he never insulted them. Never reminded them about the wedding. Never mentioned the years they ignored us while we struggled. Never brought up the fact that they mocked him in front of me like he was worthless. He simply sat there quietly listening while my parents unraveled emotionally in our living room. And somehow, that silence hurt them more. You could see it. Especially on my father's face. Because people can defend themselves against yelling. But kindness after cruelty. That kind of guilt destroys people slowly. At some point, my mother looked at me with tears running down her face and whispered, "We made mistakes." Mistakes. Such a small word for years of emotional damage. I looked at her sitting there on our couch, the same woman who once told me family seats were for immediate family only, and suddenly every memory came flooding back again. The chores. The neglect. The college rejection. The humiliation. The empty wedding chairs. And the crazy part is, even after all those years, part of me still wanted them to genuinely love me. Not need me. Love me. But sitting there in that moment, I finally accepted something painful. They still hadn't come because they missed their daughter. They came because Kaylin became successful. Because they were desperate. Because the bank was taking everything. And honestly, that realization hurt more than all the insults from years ago. Kaylin finally stood up quietly and told them he needed time to think. That was it. No dramatic speech. No revenge moment. Just honesty. My parents nodded quickly like people afraid to lose the last tiny bit of hope they had left. When they finally walked out the door, my mother turned back one last time like she wanted to say something meaningful. But nothing came out. The door closed softly behind them. And suddenly the house became quiet again. I stood there staring through the window as their car disappeared down the street while my chest felt strangely heavy. Not victorious. Not healed. Just tired. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most are still the people you spent your whole life wanting love from. So honestly, if you were me, what would you do? Would you help them after everything? Or would you walk away the same way they walked away from me? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments because stories like this are more common than people admit. And if you've ever experienced favoritism, rejection, or being treated differently inside your own family, you're definitely not alone. Also, if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like and share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. And keep watching her revenge stories for more emotional true life inspired stories like this one.